I realized the way my brain was wired needed to be reset, because I was already prone to worry and anxiety and nervousness. And I realized that I needed to change that, and I needed a new perspective. And so the psychedelic therapy really showed me that you can unplug and plug back in, Control Alt Delete, if you will, and come to life in a way that doesn't require you to worry, where it's not your default setting.
Welcome to the Set and Setting podcast with Madison Margolin. As a journalist, Madison has spent years exploring the intersection of psychedelics, cannabis, and culture. This podcast brings together thought leaders from today's psychedelic renaissance to talk about the role of psychedelics in our inner and outer lives. You can support this podcast and find additional resources at BeHereNowNetwork.com/Madison.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Set and Setting on the Be Here Now Network. Our guest today is David Romanelli. He's a wellness innovator who has written 3 books, which have been #1 Amazon bestsellers. His book, Happy is the New Healthy, was inspired by a friendship with a 111-year-old whose 3 tips to longevity were sex, vodka, and spicy food. The joie de vivre inspires his storytelling, reminding you we are all so busy that many nights we put our head on the pillow to go to sleep and don't remember a moment from that day gone by. In October, he joined forces with Daytrip to open a psychedelic retreat center called Birdsong. It's run by doctors and nurses and intended for people with trauma, depression, addiction, or just the need for self-exploration and how to restore that joie de vivre. His work has been featured in the New York Times, Food and Wine, Newsweek, and the Wall Street Journal. To learn more, you can visit his website, davidromanelli.com. So thank you so much for coming on the show. I'll tell the audience that Dave and I met recently through his work with Birdsong and Daytrip, which, are both very incredible places, both Birdsong as a retreat center space in Phoenix and Daytrip as a ketamine clinic. And so I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more in the episode. But Dave, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to start off, I know a little bit about your background. You're coming from this sort of Grateful Dead fandom and background in yoga, and you've written all these books, but what was your path that kind of led you to where you are now?
That led me to the psychedelic journey.
Yeah, I think just knowing you love the Dead, knowing you've taught yoga, now that you're kind of involved with Daytrip and ketamine, how have all these different threads of your life, and of course your writing as well, how have they kind of, what's been the overarching message, so to speak, right? What did you get into first, and how did one lead to the next?
Well, after college, 1996, I took a yoga class. And at the time, yoga was not mainstream. It was starting to become a thing in LA and New York. And there was a line down the block for this yoga class. It was a profoundly awakening spiritual experience, but also this really sweaty, intense workout. And a friend that I was with said, this yoga thing is amazing. It's going to take off. Let's quit our jobs in LA and move somewhere where there's no yoga. So we moved to Phoenix, Arizona, where I live now, and we opened the first chain of boutique yoga studios in the late 90s called At One Yoga. And, this was a time when yoga was still a little stodgy, which I think, we kind of wish that it would become again, right? The incense sticks and the tradition and the leotards, but it wasn't totally inviting to the mainstream population. And so we got rid of the senior kind of guru philosophy, and we turned up the hip hop music and made yoga very inviting and accessible and familiar to the mainstream. And so we opened this whole chain of studios in Phoenix, and that was how I really got my start on this path. And then I started teaching yoga and continued this invitation. How do you make yoga more inviting? And I would fuse yoga with passions and sensibilities. So I would do like yoga and chocolate workshops with my friend who started Vosges Chocolate. And I would do yoga and wine workshops with this wine expert, Angela Gargano. And we did yoga for foodies workshops with all these chefs. And to the purists, this was a terrible thing. But for people who were intrigued by yoga, but not totally kind of getting onto the mat, it made it that much more fun and interesting. And then there was another sort of turn in my path, because when I was doing all this yoga, my last surviving grandparent was in an old age home in LA, and I would visit her each week and saw how depressing it was at these old age facilities. And here I was in the yoga world, where the 32-year-old yoga teacher with a big Instagram following was the source of wisdom. And, you know, the Holocaust survivor, the 88-year-old Holocaust survivor, was dying a lonely death in the old age home. So I started interviewing older people all over the country. I did a series of events called Drinks with Your Elders, where I would invite isolated older people in the different communities to come and share their stories with younger people, and wrote a few books about it. And that kind of was a new chapter in my life. And the most recent chapter was that my daughter was 3 years old at the time, was diagnosed with leukemia. And that was the real shift for me. And a scary, very scary experience for a parent. And she's great today. She's turning 7 and living her best life. But going through that was severely traumatic. And I needed a new playbook, because the things that I was doing for health and healing were not totally working when you're going through that kind of trauma and worry. And so I found psychedelic therapy to be profoundly healing, and that it allowed me to kind of stop worrying, at least stop worrying to the extent that I could reset and be a better father and husband. And I was so touched by the power of psychedelic therapy that I embarked on a new career path in the last year. And I'm working with a Daytrip, which is sort of a spa-like ketamine experience in Phoenix. And I started leading retreats. People would come in from all over the country, mostly new to psychedelics, but interested. And I would take them to Daytrip for ketamine sessions. And then we'd go hiking in the desert, and we'd go to the cold plunge place and have great dinners together, like kind of a yoga retreat with a psychedelic component. And it was so resonant that we opened our own psychedelic retreat center here in Phoenix called Birdsong, which just opened in October. And that led to my meeting you and to this moment right now. So that's my circuitous path to today.
Well, you mentioned something about, when you first got into yoga, kind of the spiritual component that you came to with it, came to understand as part of yoga. And then you were also saying, around the time of your daughter's diagnosis, like that, what you were doing, like wasn't like working, right? Like it wasn't giving you the maybe spiritual sustenance that you needed. So when someone is looking into kind of like a health practice or a spiritual practice or something that's going to give them that sustenance they need, especially like in the hardest moments of life and also in day to day, like what is it? What is the substance of that? Like, what are you looking for personally? And yeah, how would you describe it, for other people kind of looking to give more, I guess like spiritual nutrition to their lives?
Well, my practice before my daughter's diagnosis was in the great lesson that I learned from the oldest of old. Like the lady who inspired my book, Happy is the New Healthy, was a super centenarian, and her whole philosophy was joie de vivre. And this is a thread that binds a lot of the oldest, happiest people that I've met, is you have to do something every day that allows you to cherish the gift of being alive. It's really hard to do now with technology consuming a lot of our time and energy, and we kind of gloss over life, and we're very busy all the time. Everything's super convenient. And sometimes entire days go by where we don't take a pause and really cherish that we're here, and that we're alive. And it's cliche, but I think it's true for a lot of people. And so that was always my great like source of wisdom. And the takeaway from the older people I interviewed was, how do you have a moment in your day to make sure that you're enjoying being alive and that you're sharing that? But that kind of changed when you're in a traumatic state, like your kid's getting cancer treatment and you're in the hospital 18 nights in a row and you're worried out of your mind, and no one can really say that the thing that's going to heal you. Before, it was always like my yogis and the yogis could make me feel better. And, like the self-help gurus would have something to say and that would nourish me. And I realized the way my brain was wired needed to be reset, because I was already prone to worry and anxiety and nervousness. And I realized that like I needed to change that, and I needed a new perspective. And so the psychedelic therapy really showed me that you can unplug and plug back in, Control Alt Delete, if you will, and come to life in a way that doesn't require you to worry, where it's not your default setting, but your default setting when you wake up in the morning can be one of gratitude and noticing all that's beautiful. Like it was the scariest moment of my life to go through cancer with my daughter. And I still have tremendous fear, but the gratitude and the joy that I have today is much more pure. And it was a gift that I received from that experience. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
And was that experience specifically ketamine when you're talking about the psychedelic therapy?
Actually the first couple I always had recreational psychedelic experience with touring with the Grateful Dead and, back in the day. But the therapeutic experience is completely different. And I had the psilocybin, like a big dose of psilocybin with an amazing medicine woman here in Arizona. And I found, it was profound. I can't say I loved it because it was kind of a harrowing experience to go through your fears and unwind from that. Ketamine, I found it to be a lot easier. I call it like the blue hill on the ski mountain versus, psilocybin can be like the double black diamond. So as long as you're ready for the double black diamond, it's deep and profound. Ketamine was just a little easier. And that was something that I would feel more comfortable suggesting to people who are new to psychedelics.
What, we talked about this a little bit when I came and visited Birdsong, but, there are so many different types of psychedelic therapeutic experiences, right? Like you said, you were on tour with the Grateful Dead. The psychedelic community of the Grateful Dead is so much different than the psychedelic communities of people who are doing ayahuasca ceremonies or people who are doing psilocybin work or going to a ketamine clinic. So, and what I really like is, having been at Birdsong, even the fact that Birdsong is named after a Dead song, how are you sort of like bringing together those different worlds? Like what is, how has the Dead really shaped your, who you are and your relationship to psychedelics, and how are you bringing that into the more, retreat and contained vibe that ketamine therapy is?
Oh, that's a great question because we're bridging the gap at Birdsong. It's a beautiful set and setting, might say a little more upscale. There's a medical component because it's run and overseen by doctors and nurses, but it's not just medical. Medical can be very sterile. And, I think that what we're doing at Birdsong is combining the world of, medical safety, because ketamine is the one legal psychedelic right now. And we want people to come and feel that they can relax, that they're in good hands, that they're safe. We do a medical intake before they come. We're always monitoring their vitals during their psychedelic journey. Always have a nurse practitioner on hand. So it feels very safe. And I think when the set and setting is such, you can go deeper and relax. But then it's not just medical. It's a soulful experience to discover the depth of your being. I call it a safari to the soul. And, the Grateful Dead and the whole history of psychedelics, there's a side of it that is very colorful and beautiful. And dare I use the word fun, and I think we want people to come to a psychedelic journey and feel safe, but also realize that this is supposed to be a soulful, yogic experience to discover those parts of yourself that sometimes lie dormant. I think a Grateful Dead concert was like that for so many people. Something is awakened and you just want to follow it and trust it and let it become a bigger part of your world. So that's kind of how we're bridging that divide.
What, just curious, because it's so fun for me to talk to deadheads. Do you have any like particular experiences with the dead that stand out to you, or that really, like you talked about being awoken, or woken up. So what, anything in particular for you that happened?
Well, I got to see Jerry Garcia 30 times before he died. So I feel so lucky to have had that experience and to share with the new age of deadheads that saw the John Mayer years, which I thought were great. A lot of people were kind of not willing to go there, but I think that the John Mayer era was super fun, and you kind of got to relive the community and spark some of those memories back to life. And I think seeing one of the great guitarists of all time and that this kind of way that they improvised every show and they were willing to experiment and trust the music, was a great life lesson. Because if we are always in our rational mind and we're in the quote unquote matrix, everything is sort of difficult every day. It's a grind. We kind of give up our human powers. We relegate our human powers of intuition and vision and empathy. You can't relegate that to technology. And so that was my favorite part of the Dead show, was that every show is different and every day is different. And if we're willing to honor the gift of every day being different and being open to that, you kind of bust through the monotony and the grind and you live in a more grateful state. So that was for me a big life lesson from the Grateful Dead, and any of that like jam band music, I think, gives you that reminder.
And why Birdsong as the namesake for their center?
Well, I think when we purchased the home, it was a bird sanctuary, and you hear literally the songs of birds. And my partner at Daytrip, Chris Cohn, is also a big fan of the Grateful Dead and loves Birdsong, the song Birdsong. And so we thought it was the perfect way to kind of bridge these worlds. And for anyone who has that history for the beauty of psychedelics, I think it'll be a little bit of a tip on kind of part of where this place is rooted in.
Yeah. Yeah. I also want to talk about, what I find so novel about what you guys are doing with Birdsong and Daytrip is that it's like the clinic comes to you. And so, when people think about ketamine therapy, they think about going to a clinic, and also the clinic Daytrip is gorgeous and super comfortable. Or, it has everything you want in a clinic. But what I think is genius is the way that you guys have Birdsong set up. And, for the audience here, it's really, it's this gorgeous house in Phoenix, and, the hot tub and ice plunge and big backyard and birds chirping. And, they have this main room, which is, for psychedelic sessions. And it seems that, part of what's so cool is that you get to do it in the place where you are staying, right? So like the ketamine comes to you. And it almost starts the integration process immediately, right? Because you don't leave the clinic and then go into your life, but you're already stationed where you're going to be having the rest of your day, whether that includes yoga or healthy eating or, whatever else someone would come to Birdsong for, which, the medicine is only one component of, a whole kind of program of offerings. So, what was your, your vision and goal in putting that together?
Yeah, I think, look, there's a lot of psychedelic retreats all over the world and all over the country. We wanted to make this psychedelic retreat. First, it's legal. So I think it's a little bit of a softer landing for someone who's new to psychedelic therapy. Or if you're an experienced psychonaut and you want to bring someone who's new to psychedelic therapy, I think it feels like a little bit of an easier first step. When I did my psychedelic therapy sessions that I mentioned previously, I would come home after the therapy, and I have young children. And so it's a shock to the system as a parent with responsibilities, to come straight from 4 grams of psilocybin in a therapeutic setting to getting like pelted with Barbie dolls and Nerf pellets. And I was like, this is really hard to do. And I know that there are other people out there for whom it's tricky to step away from your job for a long period of time, or your children. So we have a couple ways that we do this. We have something called Sacred Saturdays, and people come to Birdsong for an entire Saturday from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And it's a chance to unplug from your life for a day, because a lot of times weekends are not as restful as we hope or want them to be. So it's a chance to unplug from your life, and you start with a little yoga. And if you want the revitalizing, plunge into the cold water, we have that. And then we slowly go into the ceremony. It's an intramuscular ketamine experience. And then we come slowly out of that into integration and reflection, relaxation. After that, everyone's really hungry, and we have a meal with a private chef. And then we conclude with a sound bath at sunset. So it's just a really beautiful way to have a restorative Saturday. And then for people who want to go deeper than that, we have full retreats that are Thursday to Sunday, where you check in and you stay at Birdsong for 3 nights. It's easy to get to in that it's in the heart of Phoenix. So it's very centrally located, and you don't have to go to the far-flung corners of the earth to get there. It's very comfortable, and we kind of tend to your every need. There's massage after your journeys. There's art therapy. All the meals are with a private chef. So it's very comfortable and relaxing, a little more upscale. And so we're trying to find a way to make this kind of therapy accessible, both for people who are local in Phoenix, but also people who are coming in from all over the world to do it. So it's a little different in that, in certain regards.
Yeah. And who, so far, who are the kinds of people you'd say are interested in this, right? It sounds like it's geared more toward, adults, parents, people, people who are, kind of, how do I see it? Needing a retreat rather than, how do I say it? I'm trying to put the words to the demographic, but, I'm envisioning it as something like busy parents who, like you said, need just a day on Saturday to be with themselves, or, are there, the other question I had is are there any particular themes that you're working with? I know you talked about having themed yoga retreats. Is there anything in particular with the themes of Birdsong that you would incorporate into the retreats?
Well, just the first topic you brought up. It's people, I think, who are looking for a softer landing into psychedelics. A lot of the people on our first retreats were actually older. I'm 50, and a lot of them were my age or even older, and people entering into retirement and frustrated with not knowing what comes next, who are interested in kind of the unlock. How do I do something more adventurous and bold and courageous? Because that speaks to who they want to become in this next stage of their life. So that really took me by surprise that it was older. My mom recently came in, she's 76, and she came in and did one, which was, very surprising, and she loved it. So I think it's not just for young people. It is for older people, especially because it's overseen by doctors and nurses and it's legal. I think that feels safer for someone who's new to it. But as far as topics, there's a lady right now that we're talking to who does couples therapy. And so she's going to be running retreats for couples who are looking to reconnect. And she does like a light dose of ketamine and then creates conversation with couples. And supposedly, I haven't experienced it with my wife, but I have experienced it. I do know that when you're in a long-term relationship, psychedelics can be a huge unlock for ways that you're stuck in your relationship. So that's one example. We're having couples retreats, starting to talk about a yoga retreat, which is something I've done for many years. But if you add the psychedelic component and you integrate physically with yoga, there's a lot of power there. And I think there's a lot of yoga retreats out there. I don't know how many psychedelic yoga retreats there are. So we're definitely, I think, experimenting with what ideas resonate deeply with people who are interested in this extra dimension of exploration.
Mm-hmm. I want to also talk about the quality of the ketamine experience, right? And how it is different than regular psychedelics because it's a dissociative. So what about ketamine, you talk about it being a softer landing. What do you think is like the value in ketamine as a quote unquote psychedelic, and how does the dissociative aspect of it actually lend to the healing?
Well, I mean, it gives you a break from yourself. For me, just personally, the PTSD from what I went through with my daughter, I have many, many great days and some days that where I get triggered and scared and worried. I think that's normal for, going through something like that. And I just need a break for myself, and the ketamine is it's like it disconnects my brain from my reality. And I feel when I'm done with the journey, like just so relaxed. And I know that people are listening probably like, why do you need that? Can't you just do yoga or meditation? And yes, I love yoga and meditation. I'm doing it for 25 years, but sometimes that doesn't totally do it when the trauma is so intense. And we've had a lot of people, a lot of veterans, not to compare myself to a veteran, it's very different, but we have had a lot of military veterans who have come in and they have profound results. We have a lot of people with addiction who come in and have profound results. There's been some cases with suicidal ideation. And then just a lot of people who want a deeper exploration and they don't feel like they can get deep enough within themselves because they're just too busy, too distracted. And so either way, it's a dissociative. It disconnects you from yourself. It allows you to explore the depths of your mind. And you're only in the medicine for about an hour. So it's not the same as the psychedelics that require 4, 6, 8 hours of time. And in some ways, I do think those are more profound. I mean, the plant medicines I would say they are more profound. They take you deeper within yourself. You're dealing with like the spirit and the wisdom of the plant. And it's amazing. But ketamine also has a place in this world. It's sometimes you want a psychedelic journey that's not 6 hours. You just want an hour. You can function again fully that day. Not to say you drive home from any of these journeys, but you're fully functioning. And you just need a break from yourself sometimes. And I think ketamine's a very powerful way to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I love it because it, like you said, it just works so well in life, right? Like it's kind of without having to dive, without having to carve out 10 hours of your day or whatever, like it just integrates into your life. But I was about to say, you don't have to just dive in. And meanwhile, my experience with the intramuscular ketamine was you're just dropped into the deep end of it in this very kind of gentle way, which with other psychedelics, the come up to get to such a deep place usually comes with a little bit of like flutters or, you feel it happening. And what I experienced again with having done ketamine in various formats at this point. The intramuscular was really special. I felt like I was just like dived off, like went off a diving board and was just like swimming in the waters from the deep end within, a couple minutes of getting the injection. Is there a reason why you focus on IM or intramuscular?
Well, I mean, the most popular format for ketamine is the troche. It's like the lozenge. There's a lot of telehealth ketamine that you get the prescription in the mail. And I think the IM takes you deeper faster. It's more measured. So it's based on your body weight and your comfort and experience with psychedelic medicine. So it's a little more based on the individual. The troche is more like kind of a basic dose that you take. So it's not as measured. And then there's the IV, which is usually given for pain relief and for people with suicidal ideation. It's a slower, not as deep, but more prolonged experience of ketamine. So there's three sort of ways that I'm familiar with that it's administered.
Mm. Yeah, I guess
the IM is a little. The IM is intramuscular. You need to have a doctor or nurse practitioner present, so it's not as readily available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've done both. I've done the IM, last week at Daytrip, and also IV at another ketamine clinic a long time ago. And I recognize when you say it's sort of prolonged, but not as kind of jumping as deeply in. Either way, though, ketamine is such an interesting, weird, dreamy, like it's the psychedelic that I've had the least ability to describe the experience of. And, I describe psychedelic experience, and ketamine is just like so beyond words and so hard to explain what's actually happening, because it's because so much of you is just like not even there. Like you said, you take a break from yourself in a way where other psychedelics like psilocybin or acid or even MDMA, you're like, you're hyper associated, you're really in your body. You're really kind of dissecting your mind. Even if you do have an element of like ego dissolution, but with ketamine, it feels like you're almost outside yourself, like looking in. I don't know, kind of, I don't know what other people's experiences are generally, but it's just so hard to grasp. And does that resonate with you at all, or sound familiar with your experiences with it?
Yeah, it's interesting the way you kind of contrasted them. I saw this movie yesterday. It's like a really old movie, and it was about basically this guy who could travel back in time to certain moments and have a do-over. And at the end of the movie, he realizes he doesn't want to travel back in time, but he wants to live each day as if he's living it for the second time. And that you could come to your day as like and show up a second time. There's a lot of things we do differently. You'd have a better sense of humor, not take it so seriously, appreciate your loved ones, be more present with them, just enjoy it probably a little more than we normally do. And I think ketamine kind of has that effect where you come back to your body and it's as if you're living that day very differently, but it is very much the same day. Like after your session in Phoenix, we had dinner that night. It wasn't like you were holed up in a room, kind of coming back to your body. I mean, it is you still very much the same day that you can get back to your life. But I think you come back to your life almost as if you're living it a second time. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that analogy a lot. I felt pretty loopy for a few hours after. But I did feel very much like back in the world. And it was almost just like taking like a weird like intermission from my day for a couple hours during the ketamine and just coming back and having it be fairly normal. the other thing I noticed kind of in the experience was that I was, even though it is dissociated, I was able to sort of feel my body differently, like I could feel like heaviness around my chest or, kind of different, I would wiggle my toes just to like remind myself that I could, even though it didn't even feel like my toes at that point. But, I wonder like how ketamine, helps us reframe our kind of somatic experiences in the body, like how we're carrying emotions on, like carrying something on the chest, right? Like a heaviness on my chest that I need to get off my chest or something like that, which the ketamine put into very stark relief. Have you heard people kind of talk about their physical somatic experiences with ketamine?
Well, this is where it gets tricky because when I'm talking about Birdsong and psychedelic experiences, I mean, I don't think it creates a miracle for people, but it sets you up for your own miracle. And I think that stuff almost happens after the fact. Like, it lightens the load. It shows you insights, but then you have to do the work after to stay connected to those insights and stay connected to that lightness of being. And I think for me, those experiences that you're describing come less during the journey and more during the work after, because I don't like to make promises to people that this is going to change your life and what's going to happen during your psychedelic journey is, going to be a complete miracle. Because I think when you can't just keep doing psychedelics all the time. There was a period where I was doing a lot of psychedelics and I was like, this is going to do it for me. And I realized you can't psychedelic your way through everything. So those experiences you're describing, I think you have to do the work after your psychedelic experience.
What does that work look like for certain different people, in the integration period?
I mean, for me, it's meditation. I have these guided meditations that I send as an integration tool for people that come to Birdsong. And it's a 7-day series. And then if they want to take it into 365, I provide that for them. Just taking a few minutes in your day to remember the music, the scents, the sensory components of the psychedelic journey. And that is a bridge that reconnects you to what you felt, where you went, who or what you saw, and then how do you bring that into your day-to-day? I think meditation is a huge tool and sensory experience is a huge tool. It's just one example.
Yeah, I mean, so much of my own integration philosophy is take something sensory from the psychedelic experience and then integrate that or apply it in your regular life. So even if you're listening to the same music that you listen to under the medicine or, if you worked with essential oils or something.
Sorry.
But yeah, like you said, taking something sensory and kind of integrating it into your regular life, which is why when you talked about doing a ketamine yoga retreat at Birdsong, that sounds really perfect because so much of the consciousness, the memory of consciousness is stored in the body. And so if we can kind of trigger those memories and somatic awareness through yoga and associate the yoga poses with kind of different healing states, I think that could be really powerful.
I agree completely. And I still hear the purists in my head because there are a lot of beautiful, pure people in yoga saying, why do you have to bring psychedelics into yoga? Yeah. I can just hear those comments right now, but this is not for everyone. I always say that this is not for everyone. And you definitely get some pushback from people, but it is for people who feel stuck and the things that they're doing to get unstuck are not working. And they're looking for a way to grow and looking for something that's adventurous and different. And it's not for everyone, but it is for some people. And I
think you said it's not about bringing psychedelics into yoga. I think it's about bringing yoga into psychedelics. And that kind of changes the frame.
I love that. Well said.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It was when you were talking before about like a yoga and chocolate or yoga and wine, that I'm actually curious what that looks like. But, for me, like the most sacred part of psychedelic experience is I call it this like sparkle period where the medicine is wearing off and you still kind of have like insight into that medicine consciousness. You go toe in still or foot in, but you're starting to come into regular life. And that little period is so valuable for the integration, which is when you can start to really incorporate yoga or some other modality that will become the bridge between normal consciousness and medicine consciousness.
Yes. And that was also the idea you asked about the chocolate and wine. Like it's when you're coming out of yoga and you're really relaxed and all your senses are heightened because, everything now is digital and a great moment happens and it's like instantly we want a photo, video, text it, share it. And the moments that really stay with us are those we record through our senses. So, when you taste this delicious chocolate truffle coming out of your shavasana, you're probably more likely to remember that experience, that shavasana, than if you just rushed from your shavasana to roll up your mat and run to your car. So, I think the sensory experience is sort of forgotten in our world today. I don't think they have an app on your phone that can create that yet. And we need that because that's how we really form powerful memories.
Yeah. And I think also so much of the spirituality of an experience is stored in the sensory. We see that so much in the practice of religion, right? Like you light candles for Shabbat, you're doing something physical, but it's the idea is bringing in like spiritual light. That's just like one very simple example. But, when you're dealing with, kind of like higher levels of expanded or higher levels of consciousness that are induced, through a psychedelic or even through a really deep yoga practice, it's about really harnessing that light and, finding ways to contain it, when you're not always there, if that makes sense.
Yes. And when we start talking about higher levels of consciousness, I feel like it makes me want to share. I think that kids are already very psychedelic and holding on to that is hard. Like we're having this conversation in our house right now with my 9-year-old who is asking if Santa Claus is real. We're Jewish, but we also celebrate Christmas. And he's hearing murmurings at school that Santa's not real. And so it's kind of an interesting time because you want to keep that alive as long as you can. And like, I would almost say like these magical, like the tooth fairy and Santa Claus is sort of a higher state of consciousness. And there's all this research now, the lesson that we're telling our son is like Santa only brings gifts and only is real to people who believe in him. And there's truth to that because there's all this research now about the placebo effect and how powerful the brain is in creating its own pharmaceuticals and its own power to heal. But you have to believe that that's possible. And there's all this research now on how the placebo is real. And so I think like, we don't just create a higher consciousness through psychedelics. Psychedelics does help open your mind to a state of belief, because if you have any doubt, it's just shrouds the higher state of consciousness. And I think psychedelics is a catalyst to help you get to a state where you see there's so much beauty around you and within you, and you can believe again in a way that you could believe in the days when Santa was real. But you don't have to do psychedelics to do that. But the question is, how are you going to do that? Because if you're in a doubtful, skeptical state, it's really hard for these healing shifts to happen. So when you say higher state of consciousness, I just wanted to talk about Santa.
Yeah. I think, when we talk about psychedelics, we talk about magical thinking, right? And people kind of use that term in a derogatory way, but I think there's also something really beautiful about being able to like hold something, think magic, magical thinking that Santa Claus is real, or that, the profound light and groundedness, and that you can feel simultaneously in a psychedelic experience is that exists, right? Like, so many of us have just not even had such an experience, and when we do, can be really life changing. Just the memory of knowing that that's possible, and that's magic to me. So, yeah.
Yes, and stories. One of the integration tools I always share with people, if you're willing to share the story of your psychedelic experience, because part of the placebo effect that makes it work in the research is that you're part of a story, in the setting. And even they call it the medical theater, where you go in and they give you a placebo surgery. And there's all these crazy things that happen in terms of healing because there was a medical theater. And so I think like we all love stories. Everybody's a sucker for a good story. And the way to keep your psychedelic experience alive is by telling the story. People love to hear stories. Mm-hmm. And I always encourage people to do that. And you very well might have seen Santa and the Tooth Fairy in your psychedelic journey, which makes it that much more interesting.
So speaking of stories, I wanted just to ask you, the title of your book, Happy is the New Healthy, is just, I think kind of so much of the message the underlying message of what we're talking about. And so, how does happiness, regulate us? How does coming into joy and happiness kind of enable health? And, how does that relate to what we're talking about here with psychedelic healing?
Well, I mean, the great lessons on happiness that I learned in writing that book were inspired by that 111-year-old lady. And it wasn't always what you think. I mean, part of it was resilience, and she was married 5 times. So we call that resilience. And I think it's very, very common nowadays. I see it with kids, when things don't go your way, you just collapse into a puddle of frustration. And a lot of people are defined by what didn't go right in their life, and that's their story. And, happy people, it doesn't always mean things go right, but it's how quickly you bounce back and what you learn from it, and that you're willing and able to grow. And so that's a big lesson that I learned from her. And then she had a great sense of humor. The social worker put his hands on her shoulders to help her lie down because she was 111. And she said, "Are you propositioning me?" So she still is making like sex jokes at 111. And we just have to remember not to squeeze so tight. And the real gift that I learned from her was the joie de vivre. I mean, that's a huge part of psychedelics, is that you remember that life is beautiful, and that it's amazing to smell and taste and feel and listen. And sometimes we just get caught in the grind of the day, and we don't take any time for joie de vivre. I mean, a lot of the old people, like, that's their thing. Like the oldest lady ever, she was 122 years old and she died in 1997. Her name was Jean Calment, and she ate 2 pounds of chocolate each week. Another lady drank homemade brandy every day. Another lady always asked for fried chicken at the old age home until she was 110, and they wouldn't give it to her because it was bad for her cholesterol, and she told them to go to hell. But there's such an emphasis, as there should be, on diet and exercise and meditation, and all these things are so important. But if you're not enjoying life, it's all for naught. Yeah. And so I think that's the biggest thing with happy, is you have to make sure that you're doing something each day that just is like a deep joy. It doesn't have to be all day. And, it's not going to be the end all to all the problems, but just make sure you're having that moment where you're really cherishing it.
Wow. That's such I think that's really just so much of what we're trying to do. And I think what psychedelics can wake us up to, but it's really not even about the psychedelics. It's just like finding those things that, that elicit that level of like joy and contentment and just appreciation for being alive, which is a kind of very spiritual practice.
Yeah. And I mean, you hear it all the time, like the gift of being alive, but it is, many days go by that we are forgotten. Right. I mean, like what happened last Thursday? What happened 2 weeks ago, Friday? I mean, most people, myself included, we don't remember that. And so, if you could make sure that you have a moment every day that you cherish, and you put your head on the pillow to go to sleep, and you like, I don't know what the hell happened today, but like, let me tell you something that I do remember. And you share that because it's contagious to talk about it instead of talking about what's hurting and who's annoying you and what sucks in your life. Tell me like something amazing from today. And I need to practice this too. I'm like the farthest thing from perfect. It's just like, how do we tell better stories, and how do we have a conversation that makes you feel good?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to do here.
Cool. Well, is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you want to add or talk about, or, just kind of any like last thoughts or?
I mean, yes, we definitely want to invite you to Birdsong. It's the website is birdsong38.com, BIRDSONG 38.com. And you can look up Daytrip Health in Phoenix. And so if any of this is interesting to you, it's a very inviting, soft landing into this world of psychedelic therapy. But if you're not interested in psychedelics and you want to join me, you can go to my website, davidromanelli.com, and I'd love to connect with you, hear from you, meet you, invite you on a meditation journey, and just have a little more fun each day because I need it too. So
perfect. Well, I was going to ask how people can find you, but you just gave all the information. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and just for the work that you're doing in the world, and your perspective just brings so much light. So just want to say that, from me personally, I just feel so much gratitude for getting to know you.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Madison.
Thank you.